Carl, what have you done?
Think anyone will notice?
Mr. Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. After the sudden death of his mother at the age of 11, he moved between LA and Orlando, Florida, trying to find his way in life.
So I'm clearly a Carl Jackson fan.
Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson.
Although he was introduced to hard work, faith, and family values, as a struggling teen, he wandered down the path of least resistance, finding himself jailed twice. By the grace of God, he attended an evangelical church and found that there was a better way and accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior.
There's just no fake stuff about Carl Jackson.
Now, on the Salem Podcast Network, Carl has launched on a journey to help people of all races and backgrounds to discover facts of America's true past, as well as realize the benefits of utilizing their God-given gifts and talents, which far outweigh any benefit from a government subsidy or program.
It's dangerous out here. Let's roll, Carl.
Get going fast.
Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. I'm glad you are here. Listen, today, here's something that I've been wanting to speak about, and I spoke about it some on the Dennis Prager show just recently when I sat in for him, and I've written a column on it, and I want to talk to you about it. We're coming up near the end of Black History Month, and I got to be honest with you. I know this is going to sound crazy. I hardly ever think of Black History Month. I think it's a complete and utter joke. And so I want to explain to you why I believe, I want you to know why I believe that. I believe that Black History Month needs to go bye-bye. And it's not because, as many on the left will believe, it's because I'm a sellout to my community, to my people. By the way, I believe my people are Christians and Americans. And also, obviously, I'm Black. So I understand what the secular left wants to do by putting us all in boxes. And the secular left would also like to alienate me from the Black community, if you will, or exclude me from the Black community because I don't share many of the same beliefs, that's political beliefs anyway, that some in the Black community, or that most, quite frankly, in the Black community do. But speaking of Black History Month, I just think it's a joke. I think it's a waste. I think Black History Month does more to suppress Black history than it does to tell, or I should say Black American history, than it does to tell her story. And that's one of the reasons why I can't stand Black History Month. I think it's a joke. And part of the reason why is simply this. Part of my story, some of you that are familiar with me, part of my story is I became a conservative after living a life of sin, if you will. I'm talking about womanizing. I'm talking about crime, so on, etc. I came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. I became a Christian. And that was because God smacked me with a whole bunch of tribulations, in my life. Quite frankly, I had nowhere else to turn. And by the grace of God, at his prompting, I finally turned to him. So my conversion to conservatism was initially a spiritual one. One of the first issues that I took issue with was abortion. And I didn't care about it before. I was one of those people, although I wasn't some big time liberal, I was young, I hadn't started voting Democrat or what have you, but I was getting ready to vote for Al Gore in the 2000 election. And my view of abortion was, before that point in time, well, listen, abortion, it's not for me. It's not something that I would do, but who am I to judge others? You still hear a lot of liberals and lefties make that very argument. Who am I to judge others? I'm not guilty of it. I'm not doing it. Yet I didn't make the connection that, listen, if I vote for people that do it, then essentially I'm complicit in the act of abortion. And I didn't understand that. I didn't have that spiritual connection. So in my sinful mind, if you would, I would make excuses for supporting abortion. So spiritual conversion first. And then I started I worked a job. Actually, I worked several jobs, but I worked a couple of jobs where I would have to drive a lot. I worked a janitorial job. Good Lord, I worked actually a couple janitorial jobs. I worked worked for a cleaning company, and I worked for FedEx. So literally, I mean, I was working 3 jobs at one point. They were all part-time, but I was doing everything I could to survive at the time. This is a story for another day. I was fighting for the custody of my daughter at the time because I had a child out of wedlock at a very young age. And so I was fighting for custody of my daughter. You know, just I wasn't a dumb person. I was I knew that I was smart, but I would make some very stupid decisions. And later I would kick myself in the butt. Why did you do that? So again, it was a spiritual decision. But as a result of all of that driving, I started listening to lots of different types of radio because I just got bored with music. You know, you can only hear a song, 3, 4, 5 times a day before you're like, okay, it's lost its appeal. So I just wanted to hear something different. So I would turn to, I listened to a lot of Howard Stern on my drive time, between jobs and or in the morning. I started listening to Christian talk radio. I started listening to, I think it was Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla at the time when they were together, and they had a show. All of these different shows, Rush Limbaugh, although the story with Rush Limbaugh is I didn't even realize Rush Limbaugh was the Rush Limbaugh, if you will. I didn't realize who he was necessarily, except this guy that I would listen to on my drive home that I was entertained by. And I was starting to learn some things about politics, some things that I agreed with, some things that I disagreed with, but I mostly agreed. And then I went to some type of gathering or party where it was predominantly black people. And oddly enough, his name had come out as this racist. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I've been listening to that guy. He's not a racist. And that's when I found out Rush Limbaugh was Rush Limbaugh. It was the funniest thing. But I just started investigating. And one of the things that happened was I ran into a local mall here in Central Florida in the Orlando area. And I saw a book by Larry Elder called Stupid Black Man. And I had become a conservative. I was branding myself as a conservative, if you will, but it was, again, more of a spiritual conversion based solely upon biblical principles. And as I started waking up, I was like, man, Democrats embrace a lot of things, the more that I think about, that I don't necessarily agree with, primarily abortion. And then I even started thinking about spending. And I was like, man, they spend a lot of money. What are they doing with all this tax money? I started listening to Sekulow live at the time, the American Center for Law and Justice. And I was like, really? I mean, I started hearing court cases that were happening across the country that he was participating in. And I was like, really? Christians are really, persecuted in the United States of America? I had no clue. I had no idea. And at first I didn't even believe him. But the more I started reading and researching, I was like, oh, my God. But I walk into this mall, I see this book by Larry Elder, Stupid Black Man. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What kind of fool would name his book? I was actually upset. I was upset. But the title obviously grabbed me. And I like one of those people like walking around Barnes and Noble's Borders or whatever, pretending like I'm smart and, all this kind of stuff, just going through that field. So, I was browsing through the books, and I started to browse through his. Obviously, the title, again, caught my attention. So I'm browsing through the book. I start flipping through the book, do different chapters to just get bits and pieces. Next thing you know, I was sitting there just seriously, literally reading through the book. So I was like, screw it. I'm going to buy it. I just want to see what this guy has to say. I bought it. But there are other books that I read too. I started reading columns from Michelle Malkin. I started reading Star Parker. I read her book, Uncle Sam's Plantation. I read Jesse Lee Peterson's book, Scam. And I was like, oh my God. But Larry Elder's book introduced me to a lot of black heroes and black figures that I had never heard of before. And after that happened, I got pissed. There's no other way to say it. I got pissed. I got upset. I was like, are you kidding me? Is this true? Why has I never learned about this? I grew up in the Los Angeles Unified School District. I never learned about this stuff. I was absolutely upset. And at first I didn't know that Larry Elder was lying. So reading through that book caused me to start doing some of my own research. I started reading the writings of some guys that I had never heard of, Hiram Rhodes Revels, a senator, different congressmen, writings that I could find of them, historical writings, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. These guys really did exist. And so I just got upset. Let me read to you this article. Part of my article that I wrote on this a couple of years ago, because I want to go into a deep dive on this particular topic of conversation. Now I want to talk to you about the origins of Black History Month, where it came from, who derived it, why they created it, so on, etc. And again, I just to reiterate, or just to remind you, I just don't believe that it should exist. I don't think it's helpful. I think it does more to suppress Black history. So, and it does more. I'll get into that as well. But I want to go into a deep dive regarding the origin. So here we go. All right. So according to history.com, the origins of Black History Month begins in 1915 when Harvard-trained historian Carter G. Woodson and minister Jesse E. Moreland founded the then Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. This is an organization that is dedicated, or was dedicated, to the research and promoting achievements of Blacks and other peoples of African descent. One of the operative words, or the operative words in that sentence, is achievements. I think that's extremely important. I know there are a lot of Blacks, perhaps, that deserve recognition, but there are a lot of Blacks that deserve recognition because of their achievements and what they've accomplished, or what they accomplished in America. Extremely important word. In 1926, the article goes on. The article is written by me. You can find it on carljacksonshow.com. Just click on the search bar at the top of the page, and you'll be able to find it there. But it goes on. In 1926, the group sponsored a National Negro History Week that chose the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Republicans Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Why do I suspect that part of the reason why I didn't learn about this history regarding Black heroes that I was happy to learn about is because even Black History Month, upon its inception, upon its creation by these Harvard-trained historian, or by the Harvard-trained historian Carter G. Woodson, and by the minister Jesse E. Moreland, could it be that I hadn't heard about some of these Black heroes and Black American heroes because initially all of this stuff, including Black History Month, they wanted to bring attention to the heroes that existed within the Republican Party. The article goes on to say, my article goes on to say, in the decades following, mayors across the country began issuing annual proclamations recognizing Negro History Week. And then as a result of the renewed civil rights movement of the 1960s, and a growing awareness of Black identity, Negro History Week eventually evolved into Black History Month. And this happened on college campuses across the nation. Finally, in 1976, it was Republican, there's that dirty word again, Republicans trying their best to help out and to recognize the accomplishments of the Black community. How dare they? So Republican President Gerald R. Ford officially recognized Black History Month and called upon Americans to seize, and I quote, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. This from Republican President Gerald R. Ford. And you can imagine the left, the Democratic Party, wants to make sure that this history is buried. They do not want you to know that it was President Gerald R. Ford that created, if you will, Black History Month. You know, they don't want you to know that these gentlemen, Carter G. Woodson, that Jesse E. Moreland founded the study of Negro life and association that started all of this, and they wanted it to be associated with the birthdays of Republican President Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, who happened to be a Republican. They don't want you to know that. The left does not want you to know that, because the dirty little secret is the Democrat Party is inherently racist. And they continue with that tradition. Yes, I understand that a lot of Blacks are a part of the Democratic Party, and I understand that blacks have a lot of leadership within the Democratic Party, but look what they do. If you look like me but don't think like them, then you're not black. The thing about me, I'm like, who cares? I have to get into heaven, and it's not going to be black people that are going to usher me into heaven. That's going to be my relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's what I have to stay focused on. So, if Gerald R. Ford started this. Also, do you know that Art Fletcher worked with black Republican Art Fletcher worked with Republican President Richard Nixon in order to implement affirmative action plans so that blacks would get equal access and opportunity in colleges, in academia. So all of these things initially were built out of great intentions, and they may have been good initially, but they should have been pulled back, right? Once we got past the civil rights movement, once blacks got integrated, once blacks got equal treatment under the law, and please don't sit there and tell me, what about George Floyd? What about this and that? If you go and do research, regarding police brutality, so on, etc., police shootings of unarmed people, or however you want to say it, they shoot and kill and or shoot far more whites than they do blacks, despite the fact that blacks commit way more crime. I'm just being honest. I don't know why I'm a sellout for being honest, but whatever. Despite the fact that blacks commit way more crimes than whites do. Quite frankly, way more crime than any other ethnic group does in America. But this is part of the history of Black History Month. So everything started out with good intentions. Everything seemed to start out admirably, but I think it's gone astray. Because right now, if you talk about Black History Month, the only thing that's happened, if you will, is you get to learn about a few people. You get to learn about Martin Luther King Jr., and I love Martin Luther King Jr. Black History Month goes beyond Martin Luther King Jr. It goes beyond even Harriet Tubman. And talking about Harriet Tubman, how many of you know that as far as the Underground Railroad is concerned, white Christians helped establish that in order to help Harriet Tubman and in order to help slaves escape slavery and escape into the North. See, this is the thing about Black history that I don't like. It doesn't tell our complete story. There shouldn't be a Black History Month. Black history is a part of American history. So Black history should be taught with all aspects of American history, where it's relevant, where it's significant. Maybe we had this inventor. Maybe this slave did this or suffered this. What time and point in American history did it happen? What was going on around? What was the context of what was happening in America in that day, in that time, in that state, in that time? Again, American history or Black history is American history. We don't need a month. We don't need to feel special. We just need to be a part of American history because we are. We're Americans. And it's really that simple. But Black History Month has become more of a tool for leftists. It's become more of a tool for the revisionist historians. For the academics on these colleges and universities that are brainwashing students today. In a sense, it's contributed to this entitlement mentality that I see amongst far too many blacks today. I'm black, so you owe me something, despite the fact that, I had a caller that called into Dennis Prager the other day when I was sitting in, and he talked to me. I asked him, basically, it seemed he was a racist, in my opinion. And he was basically talking about how he believed, or I asked him a question. I asked him how many people, white people in his mind, or did he believe, or did he know were associated with slavery? So how many white people are associated with slavery that live in America today? Or what percentage of whites have any association or connection to slavery in America? And he answered 75%. Well, that's far off. The number is approximately 5%, 6%. I've heard estimates as low as 3%, but let's say approximately 5%, right? Just to be safe. Other people immigrated after the Civil War. Immigrated here. Many people came right through Ellis Island, but this guy thinks so many whites that exist here today have a connection to slavery, and it's simply not true. It's just not true. So he believes that at least 75% of people, white people in America, are somehow his enemy. It's insane. I really feel sad for him, and I hope that God helps his heart, because he really has a dark and depraved and a hateful heart. But many blacks do. And I guarantee you, he's not an exception to the rule. Many blacks believe this nonsense, that the overwhelming amount of whites have some connection to slavery, but they've developed this entitlement mentality. You should treat me good. You should treat me special. You should treat me better, not because I deserve it, not because of my work ethic, not because of my intelligence, not because of merit, in other words, but because I'm black, but because of my skin color. And that's crazy. So in essence, what's happened is we've developed this entitlement mentality, many in the black community, and also a victim mentality where it's like we need whites. Another caller called in and said something great. He was like, I don't need whites to affirm me. He was a conservative, a black conservative in Los Angeles, an older gentleman, middle-aged gentleman. And he was like, I don't need whites to affirm me. And I feel like that's another thing that black history does. It's like, affirm me, affirm me, affirm. I don't need, me personally, speaking of myself, I don't need the black community to affirm me. The affirmation that I get comes from God. It comes from my family, my wife, my daughter. I don't need affirmation from the black community. When I die, all the people that hate me aren't going to be at my funeral saying good and or bad things about me, right? It's going to be family. It's going to be friends. It's going to be your church family, people you know there. Those are the people that are in my inner circle. Those are the people and the relationships that I need to be concerned about. All of the other peripheral relationships are just silly. I mean, they just don't matter. But this entitlement mentality to victim mentality, woe is me. I need to be affirmed. I need you to know that I'm a victim. I need you to know that I'm oppressed. I think, honestly, what you need is some counseling. I mean, that's insane. Also, I think it just causes more racial division. Why isn't there a Jewish history month? Why isn't there a Latino history month, an Asian history month? Why isn't there a Native American history month? Why isn't there a Pacific Islander history month? It's insane. You have immigrants that will flock to the United States of America, including Africans, and they will do well here. But we complain as a black community about all of the atrocities and the systemic racism that exists, so other minorities can come here, work within the system, and succeed, but somehow we can't. Yet, I can turn on the television, and I see blacks that have succeeded all the time. I can look at Barack and Michelle Obama that raised to the highest level of power, not just in the land, but in the world as the United States president. And you see this all the time. You can see all of the politicians, like I said, within the Democratic Party. You can see all of the people of influence on television and media, so on, etc., that happen to be black and or minority. And it's insane. Success does exist here. And what's amazing to me is that blacks in America that say America is systemically racist won't look in the Eastern Hemisphere and say, well, wait a minute. Despite the fact that there was slavery, it did exist here, and it existed everywhere. It was universal. Blacks enslaved Brits as well, and Europeans as well. You just have to read through history. You got to get beyond American history and read some world history. So slavery was universal. Blacks aren't innocent. We enslaved each other. I'm sorry. The Roots movie, series or whatever, Kunta Kinte. No, it's not true. Whites weren't going with big old butterfly nets catching Negroes in Africa and bringing them back. I hate to break this to you, but Africans were selling Africans to Europeans. I mean, it was a way of life. That was the way of life. And I'm sorry, I don't believe these super righteous people that, oh, man, I would have never done that. Our founders are such racists and so on, etc. You know, some of them owned slaves. And yeah, but we ended slavery here. And all of you woke people that get caught up and won't look at how far we've come in America, I guarantee you, I don't think you have the moral strength. I don't think you would have been one of the people in the past to stop slavery. I think you would have been a part of it. Slavery was the evil of that day. I think wokeism is a major evil in this day. And many of you fall for it. But the racial animus, the racial division that comes out of celebrating Black History Month, that comes out of America having to constantly say, I'm sorry for slavery when America ended slavery, when our Constitution and Bill of Rights is the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, it's insane. There was Frederick Douglass once said Frederick Douglass was and I'm going to get this story semi wrong, so just forgive me, right? But he talked about how at first he didn't think the Constitution was for him. And he worked with people, abolitionists, by the way, who thought that America and the Constitution was systemically racist. But and then the more he read through it, he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This actually isn't racist as long as I can be a part of it. I want to experience this. If this is applied to me, life would be great. And he realized, wait a minute, the Constitution is important for everyone. But this is insane. This is where we are. Black History Month is just another tool of the left to use in order to get votes, in order to continue to spread hatred in America. Let me just share these couple of paragraphs, and then we'll close this out. Going back to my column, consider some of America's forgotten history. William Ellison, a former slave turned brutal slave owner who helped finance the Confederate Army. This is important. Do you realize there were Black slave owners inside of the United States? And I only share that not to single out William Ellison, but to say and to remind you that slavery was universal. Slavery was an evil. People looked at it as an evil. That's why the Industrial Revolution was so important, because before the Industrial Revolution, people wanted slaves, or people needed animals. People wanted or needed animals and or slaves to get a lot of work done, and machinery changed that around. This is why we need to go back to manufacturing and industrializing the United States of America. But William Ellison was a slave owner. How come you don't know about this guy? We're familiar with the Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves. But what about Hiram Rhodes Revels, who was the first American Black senator from 1870 to 1871 during Reconstruction? He also served in the United States Senate from 1875 to 1881, 6 years. There were 21 Black congressmen that served in the House of Representatives during Reconstruction as well. Why aren't these people taught about? Well, I can tell you, it's because they're Republican. It's because they're Republican. That's why Black History Month is a joke, too. See, you can only buy into the left's heroes in Black History Month. I forgot to tell you that. You cannot mention the Black heroes that happen to be Republican that did, and by the way, the vast majority of Blacks used to be Republican post Reconstruction, post slavery. What happened? You know, FDR started chipping away at them, developing that welfare state. LBJ seemed to finish the job off. And instead of being independent and growing in our freedom, we decided to become enslaved again by voting for the Democrat Party so we could then stay on Uncle Sam's plantation. It's insane. It's insane. But history gets even better. Despite what you've heard about the first civil rights legislation that was passed in that was passed It was 1866 that the first civil rights legislation was passed, not in 1964. Now, I know that we needed the civil rights legislation in 1964 because we had the Jim Crow South. I like to call it the Jim Crow South. So I get that. We needed that, right? But all of the civil rights legislation that had passed before, strictly because of the Republican Congress, it doesn't even, it's without a mention. So in 1870, the Republican Congress passed and ratified the 15th Amendment, which gave blacks and former slaves the right to vote. Don't forget about the 13th Amendment that freed slaves. And in 1871, the Republican Congress passed the Anti-KKK Act. Did you know that? So Republicans aren't the KKK. In 1871, they passed the Anti-KKK Act because the KKK was a terrorist organization that was created by the Democratic Party in order to terrorize, dare I say it, white Republicans and black Republicans that wanted to end slavery. Oh my goodness. Look at all this stuff you learn by listening to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. And then 1957, Republican President Dwight Eisenhower's civil rights bill was opposed by the likes of, guess who? JFK and LBJ. In Ann Coulter's book Mug, she describes how LBJ stripped the 1957 bill of its enforcement provisions. But then, thank God, Eisenhower introduced a stronger bill in 1960. Conveniently, Democrats changed their position on racism due to the political expediency of the day. And then Lyndon B. Johnson adopted Dwight Eisenhower's idea on his own civil rights bill in 1964. But the Republican Congress said, all right, well, this was really our bill anyway. But you didn't want to sign it then, you racist LBJ. You didn't want to sign it then, but you're doing it for political expediency. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Let's go ahead and get this thing done. I mean, there's so much to learn about. A.D. King, who is the father of Dr. Alveda King, that we all know and love, and her little and his little brother, Martin Luther King Jr., is another forgotten hero. He worked tirelessly, fought side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. How come we don't talk about him? You know that his body was found drowned in a pool? I mean, not too long after his brother, I think a year or so after. I mean, it's insane. Stuff we just don't know. The point is, black history, black American history, it should be treated as American history throughout the entire year, and it should stop being used as a cudgel to bloody other Americans. So just get rid of Black History Month. Let's just teach American history wherever it's relevant. So guys, listen, I appreciate you tuning in to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. If you look up Carl Jackson Show, it's going to be easier to find the podcast. So Carl Jackson Show podcast. I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you do subscribe on Apple, Google, Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube. On YouTube, make sure you click the bell so that you get the notifications. Please also follow me on Facebook, Carl Jackson Radio, and share. They are throttling me down big time on Facebook. The same is true with Twitter. But if you guys can help me out, share, retweet, so on, etc., that'll seriously help us out here. I really appreciate you being here in the fight with me. You're important to me. You're important to me. This country is important to me. And I appreciate the fact that I know that I can fight with you in order to save this country. And I love you for it. So subscribe to those places, por favor. Did I mention Twitter, Gabe? I mentioned Twitter at Carl Jackson Show, Parler at Carl Jackson Show. Guys, thank you so much for being in this fight with me. I love you. I love you. Thank you for being out there. Until next time, don't grow where you're doing good, and God bless you.